Hello and welcome to the Ronan Maher Show with me, Ronan Maher, and my very special guest, Veronica M. Veronica, hi.
Hi, Ronan. It's lovely to be on your show. I feel really honored actually that you asked me on.
Well,
Thank you.
you are very welcome. The honor is all mine. Um, so, how you doing?
I'm good, all things considered, because we're living in a rather odd, um, well, we're living in strange times, that's for sure. Um, it's good to be living in interesting times, but there's interesting and then there's totally just dystopian, um,
Yeah, yeah. I know
which is
exactly how
kind
you
of
feel.
where we are, I think.
I know exactly how you feel. As you say, it's good to live in interesting times, and arguably all times are interesting. But this is too
Yes.
much. It's oppressive. It's a nightmare.
Mm.
But but we're here. We're having this conversation now, and we're just before we press record, we were talking about being on the continuum towards a totalitarian society where people are getting
Yeah.
the midnight knock at the door. Mercifully, we're not quite at that stage yet. Let's hope it never gets there. So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, for the viewers, excuse me, for the listeners rather, I just want to say that I've invited Veronica on now because she's a superb communicator. We've gotten to know each other a bit via Twitter, and we've become friends over our dystopian landscape. She's very intelligent and knowledgeable. She has led a very interesting life, and she has a very good job, which takes her to far-flung regions of the world. Africa, for example. We're going to talk a little bit about that. She's very knowledgeable about COVID and the general manipulation of the data by the state and by the press, which is in many ways one and the same thing. And
Quite.
yeah, she's got a lot of knowledge too about the Conservative Party. You worked for the Conservative Party for a while, didn't you, Veronica?
As an activist.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll maybe talk a little bit about that. But first of all, do you want to give a little bit of a mini bio for everyone who's listening?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for that very flattering introduction. It's very kind of you. Yeah, chuffed to be on your show. I think that I feel very lucky as well to have met so many nice and bright and interesting people, including yourself, during the lockdown through social media. I know that a lot of us sort of slag off Twitter, etc., and say and social media, but I'm sort of I feel that it's not always a fair sort of judgment because, like anything, it depends on what it's used for. I think the same applies to the internet. Of course, it's a source for speeding up and spreading things further afield than at a pace which can cause, obviously, has caused problems such as what we're facing now with the hysteria around COVID, etc., and the misinformation. But it's also something which enables us to interact as well with people, that are like-minded and to counter as well what the narrative or the misinformation out there. It gives us also a platform and a medium. So I'm grateful for that. So thank you for the introduction. Just going back to my own personal background is that so I come from a mixed race. Yes, that's right, mixed race. I use that. I still use that term, and I feel that I'm allowed to use it. So it upsets certain people, which I find it's just ridiculous. So my father is Austro-Hungarian, Spanish-Irish, but born and brought up in the United Kingdom. So very, very British. My mother is from India, basically originally, and my parents met out there. Whilst my father was working for a British American Tobacco Company, which is where you met my mother. Um, Prior to that, he was actually an officer in the Royal Navy, which he left because he just couldn't hack being in submarines. It just wasn't his cup of tea. And frankly speaking, he doesn't say it, but I just think that he just found it was too much of a male environment. He's always been quite a social butterfly, and I just don't think that it would have suited him anyway. So after leaving BAT, after meeting my mom, at BAT, they got married, and he was then recruited by the UN, by the United Nations, which is where he did basically most of his career. Was the longest part of his career was for the UN, which was more than 30 years. And that took him to different parts of the world, including and mostly in Africa, which is where I spent a large part of my childhood. So a lot of my time was spent in Africa, interspaced with stints in boarding schools, mainly in France, or I also did a year in the UK, actually, in London. But the reason why I was sent to boarding schools in France is because I was schooled in the French system. Sorry, I think there's a police car. They're not coming for me.
I was going to say someone must be left a mask at home.
Exactly. So that's the background. So I spent a lot of time in Africa, spent some time in France, and was schooled in the French system up to the baccalaureate and a first year of university, which I did in France until I decided to swap and move over to the United Kingdom and come to university here in the UK. So yes, returning to the UK obviously was quite interesting because I always considered myself to be British. My parents were British. I mean, the education we had at home was British. Obviously, I was going to French schools, but that only reinforced actually my sense of my identity as being British. I always remember sitting in a history lesson in obviously we were taught in the French system, and sitting in a history lesson and the history teacher saying, "Those English bastards," and I was just like, wow. We had a 2-hour lesson, so during the break I went to see him. After the 1 hour period, I went to see him, and I was just like, "So if you don't mind, I actually happen to be British." And it was just
what did she say? What did he say? Excuse me.
He was like, so sorry. They don't realize, because I believe I have a bit of an accent when I speak English, but my French is, you cannot detect any British accent whatsoever, or any accent when I speak French. So oftentimes if I'm in company of French people and they don't know that I'm British, they would never ever guess that I'm British. And even less so that I'm quite, I'm quite patriotic as well. So it's been quite an eye-opener, actually.
Do you think that made you more... Sorry to cut you off. Do you think that made you more patriotic? Do you think those kinds of experiences, suppose, confounded your patriotism?
It's an interesting question. I think, in part, yes, but I also think that I've just always been proud of Great Britain. I don't sort of feel ashamed either of our past, etc. I know that a lot of people, we have in the news at the moment this whole thing going on about the proms, the BBC, that are thinking of, scrapping Land of Hope and Glory and all that, because it has connotations to the British Empire. But I feel that I have no issue with the past of Britain, etc. It's all part of history. There's good and bad. It's just like people. You can take a person at a given age, 50, 18 or whatever. We all have things in our past that we could have done better or that we're not necessarily proud of. It doesn't mean that up until the time that we realize that we might have done things that weren't so great needs to be cancelled or is irrelevant to who we are, today. And the same applies to Britain, to a country, a nation, and its history. It's all part and parcel. So I think that probably you're right. It did probably play a part. also because obviously being educated in the French system, everything was primarily around history that had a relationship with France, obviously, so it was the French Revolution and all of the French history. And although we covered a lot more, I would say that the curriculum did cover a lot, not only things that were related to France, but there's obviously the way that they were taught was also quite patriotic in certain respects, which I don't have an issue with. I totally respect that. But likewise, it made me also introspect and, be able to recognize that our own identity and culture and history, etc., is not something that we should, necessarily all be ashamed of. It's certain parts are not great. I'm not proud of them. But I don't feel either sense of guilt or shame about it, because it's all part of what's made us who we are today, and we're a great nation, So, and multicultural, we're accepting of other cultures. We're really, if I compare to other countries that I've lived in Europe, including France, and I've lived in the Netherlands as well as an adult for 3 years, I would say that we're very welcoming. Britain is an extremely open, friendly, open-minded and welcoming nation. And I think that the attacks that it's been sort of subjected to over the past, let's say, 4 or 5 years in particular, I think that in the run-up to Brexit, to begin with, but also since Brexit, that's just sort of heightened, is not warranted. I don't think it's justified at all.
No, I don't either, and I find it extremely irritating. All criticism, I say this all the time, all criticism is comparative. So when they turn around and say that Britain is a racist country, well, compared to where? Which country in the world would you most like to go and live in because you hate racism so much? Which country has far less racism than Britain? And they can't answer this question. I've never gotten a good answer to that question.
No.
France, even, all the research shows, Pew Research, for example, the Pew Research Centre, which is generally quite good as far as these things go. Pew Research showed that people in France, Germany, Central Europe, and going out into Eastern Europe have way more of a problem with the idea of someone from another country living next door to them than anyone in Britain. It's a much more open and welcoming country. I'm not saying that everyone in France and Germany is baying for their black neighbor or something. Obviously, I'm just pointing out that what you just said. Britain is a very welcoming country. Although I have to say that I think it is no longer as welcoming as it was, largely because of this Black Lives Matter movement, because of the hissy fit thrown by the Remain movement in response to Brexit, and the kind of demonization of people in Britain who identify as British and are proud to be British. The demonization of them as racists, of xenophobes, so on. It's wholly false, and it set us back. It set us back, and the Black Lives Matter movement, especially. This is a vicious movement. I mean, do you follow Andy? Is it Andy Ngo, the Asian American reporter?
Yes.
I don't know if I'm saying his name right. And Andy Ngo.
Yes.
He posts extraordinary footage of violence, rioting and looting and beating and every single night for months in Portland and Seattle, and it's spread to Wisconsin now. I believe there was a shooting. A man was shot by the police. A black man. I watched the video. He's told to stop by the police, who have their guns drawn on him, and he ignores them, and they're saying, "Stop, stop, stop," and he's ignoring them. He goes around the side of a car, opens the car, and reaches into the car, and the policeman up behind him shoots him, I think, 7 times in the back.
Okay.
Now, the police officer was white, the man who was shot was black. Automatically, it becomes a race issue. It doesn't matter that there are countless videos of black police officers and white criminals or people who arguably are not criminals being unfairly treated by the police. None of this matters. It's automatically, like with George Floyd, a race issue. And now Wisconsin's on fire. And businesses are being burnt to the ground. All the rioting and looting. The Black Lives Matter playbook. How anyone could support this, it beggars belief. The BBC's thrown its full support behind it. This proms issue is a disgrace, which you already mentioned. I mean, people are focusing on the threat of removing Rule Britannia from the playlist. But I think they should maybe be a little bit more interested in why it is the BBC sees fit to have a Black Lives Matter proms.
Correct.
You know, what? A Black Lives Matter proms? Are you serious? This movement is Marxist. You know, I mean, I consider that to be morally equivalent to Nazi. And it's thrown its weight behind it. It's dividing the society along racial lines. So yeah, I mean, we weren't. I think I don't know how you feel about this. I think we weren't a country with a problem with race 3 months ago, but I think now, unfortunately,
I agree.
There really are problems, and I see it in people on the right who are commenting on the migrant crisis in the channel.
Yeah.
There's way less time for this sort of thing now than there was before. Way less tolerance for it. I can see people are a lot sharper, and I have noticed more racialized language used, and I don't know. I mean, I've pulled up a couple of Twitter profiles and gone into the past, just random profiles, gone into the past, looked at their tweets prior to Black Lives Matter, and the language is notably softer when it comes to discussions of immigration. Illegal immigration, of course, we're talking about specifically here now, aren't we? There's nowhere else in the world that would tolerate this sort of stuff. People jumping into rubber boats and piling across the, piling into their waters without any identification, because of course they've flung that away, and without any way of checking who they are, what their intentions are, what the kind of things they've done in the places they come from. But we've been incredibly tolerant of it. But again, as I said, because of Black Lives Matter, I think it's because of Black Lives Matter. That's obviously just my opinion. I can't prove it. I think it has hardened people to this problem and racialized it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think I've also noticed that the tone, even amongst the people that I follow, that follow me, I can see that the tone has changed, has shifted in the language that they use. I can sense as well that, and it's funny to see how it's been gradual, obviously, but it's still rapid because it's only in a space of 3 months or so, you know, as you say, or less. And speaking as well, going out and about and speaking with people. I had a neighbor here who was speaking to me about his dad, lifelong conservatives, but they're from Norfolk area. So the dad's an accountant, a chartered accountant, and he's a gas safety engineer. And he was telling me that because of the way his father and his father's peers, so his father's friends and the circles that he moves around in, had viewed the government's lack of sort of response and control of the situation that we had, was the Black Lives Matter protests in London, etc., was the defacing of the statues of the cenotaph and all that activity, and they felt that nothing serious was done really to try and stop it, that it was just appeasing, from the government. We had just constant appeasement from Boris and even from the Home Secretary, who actually, I was really cheesed off when she started engaging herself in what I considered to be exactly the same type of rhetoric, when she used her sort of racial background as an Asian coming from Uganda. And I just thought, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that, Priti Patel? You're literally engaging in exactly the same type of ridiculous nonsense, don't give it any oxygen. So rather than either, they didn't even ignore it. Ignoring it in any case wasn't good enough at that point, because I mean, we were under assault, really. I mean, our culture and our identity. This is like a Marxist onslaught, and the fact that you think that the answer is to cover up the statue of Winston Churchill and to box him up, is just capitulation. Yeah, it's shameful. So these people, solid sort of normal, not at all extremists, people that have just been, middle of the road conservatives all their lives, hardworking folk, have now, because of all this, are now saying stuff like they've had enough, and now actually it's making them look at race, and it's making them look at people that they interact with, and they're looking at things differently. They are actually seeing things through a racial prism, which they never actually did prior to all this Black Lives Matter nonsense, and prior to our government being completely, a so-called conservative government being completely lackadaisical about it, to the point of, as far as I'm concerned, it's not even appeasement anymore. It's almost like an endorsement of it, just a kind of silent, it's almost as if it's convenient to them, because it helps them to usher in more of their own sort of socialist leanings, which we're seeing more and more of, from this so-called conservative party of ours. So it's almost like helps them along, as it were,
Yeah. It's never ending too with the Conservative Party. This pandering to identity politics and to a very specific form of identity politics, which is, say, a kind of neo-Marxism. Sean Bailey's now starting to play this game, isn't he? This story is for people who are listening. Sean Bailey is the Conservative Party mayoral candidate who's going to go up against Sadiq Khan. When is it? But when is the? Do you know when the election?
It's next year sometime.
Next year sometime.
Oh, yeah. You mean, yeah.
Anyway, Sean Bailey's a young, and he's a black man, isn't he? From
yes.
Where? Do you know where he's from?
Isn't he Jamaican originally?
Jamaican heritage, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure though. So.
Okay, I mean, I shouldn't think like this, but the times make me think like this. Whenever I see in the Conservative or Labour Party or any British party for that matter, an ethnic minority candidate, I sometimes wonder, have they put them there to sort of play that card? And I hate myself for thinking like that. Hate it. I wasn't brought up like that. I don't know that's the case with Sean Bailey. Sean Bailey, seems all right. He certainly did until yesterday. Anyway, he seems certainly better than Sadiq Khan. Anyway, he's like a quite a bright man. He's a good communicator, great. But yesterday he comes out and he says that now for people listening, we have a major problem in this country with gang violence. Stabbings are commonplace. People are dying a lot. We even have machete murders in the streets of Britain today. It's the most extraordinary thing, which 20 years ago would have been unthinkable. Now it happens a lot. People are getting hacked to death in the middle of the day with machetes. Now, Not exclusively, but most of the people involved in these crimes are young black men, mainly from Caribbean background, not African background, which is to say where their parents were African immigrants. Young Somalians who've came over recently, young Eritreans who've come over recently are involved for sure. But I'm saying this because people tend to forget that there's a lot more conservatism throughout African culture than people tend to realize, and that definitely means less crime, more stability in the family in Britain. Anyway, yeah, most of them are from a Caribbean background, and Sean Bailey's approach to this is to blame the drugs and blame the people who take the drugs, which is to say, middle class people. Never mind that this is wholly false, and that
Yeah.
people of every class take. Cocaine is the main driving force here. He's decided to say that what we need to do is have mandatory drug testing in companies to catch these middle class coke sniffers, and that will deal with the problem. Total madness. Quite clearly, it is pandering to the left. Quite clearly, he doesn't want to confront the very real problems we have with gang violence, especially with young black men. Young black men in London now, 42% of them are unemployed. And that's 16 to 24-year-olds. That is horrendous. Terrible situation. No one wants to talk about it. No one wants to confront it. Instead, they want to talk about a sort of caricature of kind of middle class lawyer sort
Stockbroker.
of stockbrokers. If we were just to get rid of the stockbrokers, if we were to get all the stockbrokers to the Priory, we'll get all the stockbrokers to the Priory. We'll get them clean, and the problems will go away. This is delusional, totally delusional. It really is. So yeah, no, I mean Sean Bailey is just another example of this leftward drift within the Conservative Party, which you mentioned earlier that you were an activist. Now
That's right.
we discussed this before, and I think this is people have got to hear what it's like, because I'll let you explain.
Okay. So yeah, I got involved with them. Firstly, because I'm a Brexiteer, which again doesn't fit the stereotype, because I've obviously had an international upbringing. I wasn't even schooled in the English system. I've lived in France. I've lived in Europe. I have nothing against my European sort of connections, etc. I have family in Europe. And so, as my sort of interest in the European Union, or rather, when I started thinking that there's something's really not right here, was at the I think 2010. So 2009, 2010, just at the when we had the credit crunch. And we had the coalition government, I think, in place then, didn't we? We had the Lib Dems and Conservatives. So we had Clegg and Cameron in. And I remember there was a whole issue going on about the Euro bailouts, basically, where Britain ended up having to bail out the Eurozone. And I just thought, hang on a minute, just what's going on here? This just doesn't sound right. So that sort of started, for me, that was the beginning of my journey into looking into the EU and everything else. So I had for a while already been looking into it, and I thought this is not good, and Britain needs to come out for a number of reasons. But for me, the main reason was just the sovereignty issue, which is that we were just giving more and more of our own sort of national sovereignty, our own ability to make our own decisions and stuff to the EU. And so I thought this is just not good at all. So I started getting involved in trying to get Cameron elected, because he obviously offered to give us a referendum. So I thought, this is brilliant. I was already a Conservative anyway, but not, active. So I thought, we really need to get this done. So I started getting active. I went on the campaign trail, etc. I was even in one of those buses. I think they got in trouble because we went campaigning, and anyway, it was that's a different story. But so I got involved, and little by little I got more and more obviously involved until recently. So all the election campaigns, including Boris Johnson's party leadership bid, etc., everything. Until recently, just before the lockdown, where I was adamant that we shouldn't implement a lockdown, that the government shouldn't implement a lockdown. I thought it was completely the wrong advice that people were giving Boris Johnson internally. I expressed that basically. I was quite vocal about my objections towards the lockdown.
Can you just for context put a few of your arguments at that time over now, just so people understand that it wasn't like you were I don't know, just saying do nothing to try and stop the virus, and that you believed that you had some kind of special powers, anything like that. Just so people understand how you're getting treated the way you were treated, why it was so wrong.
Okay, so basically, what I was saying was that I felt that the measures that were already in place, which was the washing of the hands, the social distancing, and just generally the measures that had been implemented were sufficient in addressing the pandemic, and that I had already as well had been looking at what Sweden was doing, and I knew that Sweden was resisting the lockdown. I also had a sense that there was a lot of hysteria, that the media was whipping people into a frenzy. The general public was already quite hysterical, I felt. Nothing was factual. Everything seemed to be emotive. Everybody seemed to be just completely hysterical and not focusing on actual facts and evidence that we already had, such as, for example, the Diamond Princess, which we already had data on that. We had images, etc., coming out of Italy, but we had as well data and evidence coming out of Italy in terms of the fact that it was mainly affecting people of a certain age group. We knew that already before lockdown. So we knew that the virus was discriminatory, predominantly discriminatory against the older population and a population which already had pre-existing conditions, so comorbidities, etc. So that was information that we already had. So it just didn't seem proportionate to me to be locking down an entire healthy population. And also, I just thought, hang on a minute, why are we just copying a policy that was implemented in the CCP, where the virus emanated from? Because alarm bells were ringing for me as well. I just thought, hang on a minute, this virus started in the CCP. The WHO, we already knew there were a number of inconsistencies. So when we reached lockdown, we already knew that the WHO had given a number of different or false information regarding the evidence that was coming out of China, in fact, helping suppress it and not sounding the alarm soon enough. We knew before lockdown that China had also acted in authoritarian ways with people who had tried to blow the whistle about the virus, etc. So there was we already had a bunch of information that indicated to me that we were being hysterical, number one, here about it, because we already had some data and evidence of obviously all the images that we were getting were very alarming, but that was purpose. That was done on purpose. I've grown up in countries where these things happen quite frequently in Africa. Coup d'etats and propaganda and everything are things that are used quite readily. So for me, it wasn't difficult to recognize that what we were seeing actually was a certain form of exactly that, that there was a lot of hysteria. Piers Morgan just stands out to me as well at the time as being so aggressively pro-lockdown without any real basis, for it, other than just hysteria. People are going to die, masses of people are going to die. And obviously the data that we had as well from Imperial College, which had already been queried by other scientists and other specialists as being out by an order of magnitude. They were already querying the figures that Professor Ferguson's data modeling projections were coming up with, and saying that it seemed that they were grossly overestimated. So we had enough information.
And these weren't kind of kooks and outliers who were criticizing Ferguson's models. It was people like Professor Michael Levitt, Nobel Prize-winning scientist, John Ioannidis, Professor John Ioannidis at Stanford University, and a lot of mathematicians at Oxford, for example, just felt that he was making elementary errors in his modeling, which were just like, this is, you can't, this is very quite shoddy stuff, And I think Michael Levitt actually contacted him about some of the errors that he was making, contacted the team at Imperial at least, and pointed them out. They didn't even get back to him, as far as I'm aware.
I've heard the same. And we had Giesecke as well in Sweden, who also was saying that he thought that it was really an overestimation, and that he actually said himself that he thought that people were just overreacting, that there was a panic, hysteria, and that it was clouding people's judgment. And I could see that. I agreed with them, basically. So what I said to the conservatives that I was in contact with, etc., was exactly that. I was saying that I think that that we just need to stop panicking, and we shouldn't pander to the media. That it's quite clear that the media is trying to sway, or influence government's policy, and the government should stand firm and shouldn't just give in to mass media, to the hysteria basically of the media and the general public. And I said that we should stand and continue and do follow the same sort of path that Sweden was following, and that just wasn't well received at all.
Where were you when you said this to them? Was it a meeting? Were you flyering?
So in a meeting and in some groups, so some restricted groups for campaigners, Tory party groups.
Okay.
Where these are people that I knew I'd campaigned with in the past. I thought I knew and understood very well. I was actually, the other thing that surprised me was that a lot of them were Brexiteers as well, not all of them. But, and I was just thinking, this just goes in complete contradiction. It's in complete opposition to what we were campaigning about for Brexit, which was freedom, liberty, and all that. And I'm thinking, and now you're backing.
I have to say, I differ with you on that about Brexit. I was talking about this recently talked about it with several people recently. I think the idea that Brexit was about making Britain into a kind of Hong Kong or a Singapore, a more kind of classically liberal society. I would love to live in a I would get rid of most of the state, as you know now at this point. I would melt it all down except for the museums. We keep the museums open. Yeah, that's about it really. The police, get rid of the police with their little outfits and their pride mobiles, and we'll be fine. Okay, but no, I don't think that Brexit was about that at all, because I believe that Britain is fundamentally a left-wing country, kind of certainly economically, and I think increasingly socially as well, and that people who, have a kind of like Thatcherite Sowellian sort of look at the world are very much in the minority here. So yeah, no, I didn't see Brexit in those terms at all. I thought it was about immigration. I thought it was about sovereignty. I thought it was about democracy. I thought it was a bit of a spasm as well, a bit of a reaction against the perpetual encroachments on everyday life of the authoritarian liberal left, and obviously Donald Trump represents a similar reaction in the United States to Hillary Clinton and Obama. But no, I didn't think it was about freedom and liberty.
That's interesting.
Myself.
And what I would say is that you're probably right, and I was naive. And I think that the Brexiteers, or a lot of the Brexiteers that I was maybe exchanging with, had more of our maybe view of things, and I didn't actually appreciate how left-wing the Tory party really is.
Yeah.
And I think because I was interacting as well with some of the old school sort of real staunch Brexiteers and in the Tory party, I sort of lost sight of the fact that a lot of them, or not actually really, because I came to realize that very quickly after, when obviously we had the parliament that was completely, rebels that were trying to, derail Brexit for I don't know how long under Theresa May, etc. Then that's when I started realizing that cracking, these people are absolutely not on our side. None of them, or really only like a couple of them, if that. And I just started seeing basically that this is not good at all. And then I started having conversations. So when I mentioned, firstly, just to come back to what happened with these in this group with activists, etc., and the Tory party, is that when I basically made it clear that I was totally opposed to the lockdown, I was basically called genocidal. I was called all sorts of things.
You were called
literally
what?
Genocidal. I was called like a eugenicist.
To your
that
face?
I was yeah.
So
when I actually also said, yeah, and when I said that, which I thought I just said, you're being absolutely ridiculous, because I said what I'm advocating is that we should shield the vulnerable, and we know from the evidence, etc., that we already have, that we need to protect, obviously, the elderly and all those that have already pre-existing conditions, etc., that might make them more susceptible to catching COVID-19, and that we should be making all those, taking those measures, but not locking down the entire population and shutting down, I don't know what percentage of the economy, I said that's just going to cause more harm. To me, it was just the economic argument as well was very much as well important from the beginning. I just felt that it was completely ignored. Nobody gave it any consideration at government level, as far as I could see, of the impacts, the negative impacts and ramifications of what the lockdown would do, basically, and how it would impact on so many people, livelihoods, quality of life, well-being, etc. And I was just thinking, why are we ignoring this? And I basically said, oh, they got very angry as well when I said that what you're doing is just you're going with the optics here. It's nothing to do with health. It's nothing to do with people's well-being. It's just all to do with the optics, because you can't take the fact that the Tories are being called eugenicists and just that they're wanting all the elderly to die. They don't care about the elderly, which I said it needs countering. What we need to do as a party is to counter all those arguments, not just give in to them.
Yeah.
It was illogical anyway. How can the Tory party the left accuses the Tory party voter of being an old white people? All the elderly are apparently Tories. So why would the Tories want to get rid of the majority of their voters then?
Yeah.
I mean, it just didn't make sense in any case.
Are they implying that they were suicidal? Was it a giant suicide? Wasn't like Jim Jones, kind of a Kool-Aid situation? total madness.
Yeah.
No logic whatsoever.
I was in a group chat and also expressing that I thought that we should really be now pulling back from our engagements with China. I said I had always been uncomfortable about certain aspects of our involvement with China, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure, etc. The fact that the 5G contract and all that, I just thought it just doesn't make sense. It makes even less sense now, given the way that they had behaved around COVID-19 and trying to suppress information, etc. I just thought this is not a friendly, cuddly, nation that we should be cozying up to.
No.
It's China. Have we forgotten? Have we forgotten that it's a one party, authoritarian communist
It's the
regime.
Chinese Communist Party. They every child in China gets taught dialectical materialism from being 2 or 3 years of age. It is the Chinese Communist Party. You shouldn't.
Yeah.
That should really be, when it comes to exposing critical infrastructure, the end of the analysis. Shouldn't need to go any further than that.
No.
Don't need to have open hostility with the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think that's in our interests. Continue to trade with them, although there are question marks over that, but maybe we'll come to that in a while. But the idea that you expose critical infrastructure to the Chinese intelligence services, who of course have, as a matter of Communist Party law, access to anything they want in companies, including Huawei. Is it Huawei? Yeah. It's quite mad. So what was the reaction to
So
that?
the reaction to that, to when I said that we should back off from 5G, and that this is, some serious questions need to be asked, and I hope that the government, as a conservative government, it really should be like getting serious about asking China, what they thought they were doing. Basically, the government was like all this COVID stuff. And anyway, so the response I got was literally somebody told me that I was nuts, that was conspiracy theorist nonsense. That I got actually. Are you wearing a white suit with basically a Ku Klux Klan suit? Is what I got as well from one person. That typed that to me in a chat. Yeah, they were like, "Oh, Veronica, are you sitting there typing in your white Ku Klux Klan suit?" To which I responded, "No, actually, I'm sitting in my sari. I'm typing it to you sitting in a sari."
Good answer.
One of my mom's saris, I said.
Just to clarify, these engagements are like, what is it, like WhatsApp or something, or some kind of social media chat?
That was exactly.
It's interesting.
But I knew these people.
People
like
who
met
you
them.
like in real life,
physically.
Right.
Yeah.
Because this is something you get a lot these days, where people say the most unbelievably abusive, obnoxious things to people online, which they'd never say to you face to face. But it's interesting that these are people you've actually met in real life, and you knew, and you'd worked with, and presumably you'd friends with in some ways, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine saying something like that. You're genocide, a genocidal clans member. It's like
yeah, exactly.
That's unhinged.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing was I got blocked. I got kicked out basically from all the basically all the campaign groups, social media campaign groups, etc. I got blocked out, basically kicked out of them, because I think the final straw was I just kept posting information that was coming out from all these different scientists, etc. I kept putting any news article or item that was coming out supporting the herd immunity strategy, so not implementing lockdown, doing what Sweden did, just carrying on with social distancing, etc. And every time I had something, I kept posting it in there, hoping that they would read it and start to see that I'm not just saying it. There's other people, who need like a balanced approach here. And then the final straw was I shared Peter Hitchens, because he was quite vocal and one of the first, the early sort of ones to stick his neck out, against lockdown, etc. And then I got, oh, that's it, what is she saying? What are you saying? Are you telling her this is just crazy? Are you telling us that Peter Hitchens should be PM now? That we should have Peter Hitchens running the country? And it was just ridiculous. You couldn't even engage. I couldn't engage with them at that point. Then they kept saying to me, what is it you want? So I'd repeat, I'd say, what I want is that we carry on with what we're currently doing, but just increase, do what Sweden's doing and just make sure that we shield the vulnerable. So I kept repeating it until I was blue in the face. And each time it was like, well, what do you want? So what you're saying is we should do nothing. So it was literally like having a conversation with a socialist, which at that point, at that point I was like, wow. And actually I was looking at certain of the people in the group, and some of them do come from a socialist background. So they were previously, for most of their lives, Labour voters, and some of them had transitioned basically because of Brexit. And also, I dare say, which brings us back to a point that you had made, or a question that you had raised earlier regarding the Conservative Party and the adoption of more sort of balmy people within the party. And what I actually think happened, and I agree with you, or my answer to that question, I have an opinion on it, is that I do think that there was an active drive to recruit and promote more people from the balmy communities within the Conservative Party to obviously appeal to that cross-section of the electorate, and also just as a counter to the accusation that the Tories were the racist party. So it was, again, capitulation, as far as I'm concerned. It was, again, appeasing, instead of making the argument, they just give in and, just give in to the rhetoric and start recruiting more sort of balmy. So I think that, going back to Sean Bailey, I actually don't think that he's the best candidate to take on Sadiq Khan or, for the job. I have nothing against him personally. It's not even if they wanted a candidate from that sort of ethnic background, I think that they could have got somebody more suited to being to the job, a proper Conservative,
I can think of someone.
But it just, and I feel that I can say these things because I am part, as I said before, my mother is originally from India, so, but I would never use that. I find it repulsive, actually, when that's used, and I find it even more repulsive when it's used by a Conservative. That's why I actually supported Priti Patel. I actually believed in all her promises, etc. I thought that she was a proper Conservative, a proper Thatcherite. I thought that she would really meant what she said, basically. But the way that she behaved when we had the Black Lives Matter protest, and the wrangle that she got in was a member of the opposition, who is a member of the Labour Party, I forget her name now, and they got into this kind of I'm sorry to use the word, but it was like a bitch fight, it was just ugly on so many levels. And I just thought, why are you even engaging in this and trying to justify yourself by now making a reference to the fact that you're also Asian? And I just thought it's irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant. You're either Conservative, you believe in certain things, or you don't. It doesn't matter what your background is. But so to have basically this whole, I realized that what was basically happening was just that I was being ostracized because I wasn't towing the party line. So they literally said that I'm being anti-government. I'm anti-government now, so I need to be booted out.
Wow. So I mean, it was party line with a capital P, wasn't it?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
this is just blue momentum, isn't it? You know,
Yeah,
that kind of behavior where people are whipped to toe the party line, deeply intolerant, and just has to be said, this kind of promoting people to positions on the basis of their ethnic background, their racial background, is racist. That is racist.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, it's racist on at least two levels, or two different groups of people. It's racist towards those who you exclude, who could have taken up the position, be they white or be they, you know, from whatever chosen group that comes below the one you want to promote. You know, the Asian
Absolutely.
Asian people from places like Singapore, for example, they don't
Yeah.
get elevated.
No.
You know, it's racist against them, and it's racist against is it BAME people, Barmy people. But it's
Yeah.
racist against them. You're saying that they cannot get there on their own steam. You're saying that they can't do it unless they are, you know, given a leg up by the socialists. That's
Exactly.
racism. It's racism.
It is.
You know, I think
Totally.
the soft bigotry of low expectations, I think, is quite
Yeah.
a good term for it. You know, and
Yeah.
no one who calls themselves a conservative or a classical liberal should have anything to do with that sort of behaviour. And to see it going on in so-called Conservative Party here is, I mean, I don't have any feelings for the party. I don't have any loyalties to it. I don't have that at all. I mean, I lived out of the country for 8 years over in Ireland, so I mean, I don't
Yeah.
have a football team when it comes to politics. You know, I mean, Britain is a bit like that, isn't it? With the two big parties. You know,
Yeah.
there are people who are kind of like, cut me open and I bleed red, Labour till I die. You know, and then there's the Tory equivalent, and both groups of people to a certain extent. You know, if you were to
Absolutely.
pin a red rosette on a
Yeah.
donkey, they'd vote for it. If they pin a blue rosette on a donkey, they'd vote for it too. Although, of
Correct.
course, the whole red wall thing sort of kind of torpedoed that, didn't it? But anyway, I don't have any feelings for it. For me, it's all about what it does to the country, because of course it's the largest and most powerful party in the country, and that
Yeah.
has implications for my life, for my family's life. It's very, very concerning that it's the way it is. I don't see it getting better. You know,
No.
we've discussed this several times. I don't see it getting better. You know, there are people who believe that the answer to this is to reform the party. They believe that it can be done, and they seem to be, I don't know, they seem quite sincere. But I think that's delusional. You know, and I think things that you're explaining to me here make that even clearer. Did you mentioned that some of the people in the group, their background was more kind of Labour, socialist. Was that related to the Red Wall? Were they kind of new members?
No. So they had joined prior to this sort of, but it was Brexit related.
Right.
So what attracted them was the Brexit thing, you know,
Yeah.
because obviously, I think that Corbyn, obviously, there was a core Brexit Labour, you know, membership, but they never really got represented properly, did they? Because Corbyn just, although we all believed that he was an out and out, you know, Brexiteer, hated the
It's a very
EU,
principled
etc.
man.
Yeah.
Such a principled man. They remember. I used to always hear that, didn't you? Jeremy Corbyn. He's
Yes.
such a lovely, principled man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet man as well, apparently.
Is it Groucho Marx, isn't he? Those are my principles, and if you don't like them, I've got others.
Yeah. quite. No, so for me, it's been a real eye opener. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not, if there's one thing I won't be is gagged. And then I thought, right, so really what you're trying to do is you're trying to gag me here. You won't even hear me out. And then I had people saying it was literally became, because people, so there was two things going on. Some of them were just hysterical, so terrorized about the virus. So you couldn't reason with them about not locking down. Some of them had already taken their kids out of school 2 or 3 weeks prior to lockdown. So they're
Right.
preempted. These are conservatives, and they were actually slagging Boris off. They were like, he's lost the plot. We should have locked down way sooner. And I was thinking, this is just nuts. No, we shouldn't lock down at all, you know? So my view is that Boris was I actually don't think that Boris was inclined to lock down, but he capitulated, basically. He just got browbeaten into it. They managed to convince him that it was the only thing that they could do. And still now I have some conversations with them. And what I get with some that are beginning to realize that maybe it was an overkill and we didn't really need to lock down. And yes, Sweden does seem to have managed, and Sweden hasn't turned into one big morgue, you know. And so now what I get is, yeah, but there wasn't really any other choice politically. And that just makes me even madder. That makes me even more angry.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Because it just confirms.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's my friend calls it performative politics. You know, they're just seeing which way the wind blows. Well, what's palatable? What I think they ask themselves when they get up, Boris, and you know the Philip Hammonds and these sorts of people. I think they get up, and when they decide what they're going to do, it's based on the question: what will the Guardian say?
Yeah.
What will Polly Toyne be right? What will Gary Young write about me if I do this? I think that forms, you know, a lot of the decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's far too much. Well, I mean, they've been going on opinion polls as well, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can't govern a country based on public opinion, especially not in a crisis, for crying out loud, you know? Yeah. I mean, I can understand trying to gauge whether or not, you know, we should have a referendum maybe on a certain question. And, you know, looking at opinion polls for that. But I mean, really, on actually implementing draconian measures to soi-disant kill a virus, you know, or I mean, this whole like COVID, this
COVID zero,
sort of this war zero COVID thing is just, it just every time I see it, I just think, how daft can people be, you know? It's a crazy sort of ambition. It's as crazy as net zero. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, unrelated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
I know I sound slightly conspiratorial when I say this, but I don't. At this stage, I kind of don't care. I mean, at least I'm not talking about lizard master race anyway.
Oh God.
That we must come on to that shortly. I think that's certainly worth covering in March on Saturday.
Yes.
I think we've got to talk about that. But anyway, no, the green agenda is certainly at the heart of this situation. I don't think that it was. I don't think the lockdown was provoked by those people for this agenda, but I do think that the old Machiavellian never let a good crisis go to waste
Correct.
dictum is in play here, and that they are seeing this as their time to, you know, ground the planes and get rid of all the cars and, you know, have us all
of course.
Living carbon zero lifestyles. You know, I think that plenty of course, I said, I think the evidence is there, isn't it? You only
It
have to
is.
go to the Green Party pages, Caroline Lucas, people like this, and
Oh
go and
gosh.
look at the things that they're saying. It's quite clear that they see this as their moment. It's like strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely.
let's get back to a sort of pre-agricultural time when everyone lived much happier lives. It's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting that it's quite clear they mean us. They don't mean them.
Oh yes, of
They'll
course.
have to continue because they've got important work to do. They'll have to
Of
continue
course.
driving around in petrol cars. They'll have to
Flying
continue
around in jets.
flying to important conferences at the
Yeah.
other end of the world. They'll have to
Yeah.
continue doing that. They'll have to continue living in normal properties, beautiful properties, while we all go and live in like I don't know, kind of like eco rabbit hutches or something. Um,
Yeah.
it's clear it's clear that that's what they want for us. So yeah, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory,
No.
the realms of lizard master races. It
No.
is clear that that's people do things like that, don't they? That's kind of normal. I don't blame them.
Yeah. It's
I don't
just
blame them.
hijacking an agenda. Yeah. It's just like you said. It's just taking advantage of a crisis. Taking advantage of the situation to further their agenda. And
Sure.
and what a brilliant sort of situation they've got here. I mean, who wouldn't you? If I were them, I would do exactly that. I would think, wow. I mean, this is like a dream come true here. People are
Yeah.
locked down. There's no more cars going about. We can make our case. We can
Yeah, and
you know,
they've got the ear of the prime minister
yeah,
too, haven't they?
yeah,
I mean, I don't know what Boris thinks about climate change. I don't know, I don't know what Boris genuinely thinks about anything, to be honest with you, because he's so such kind of an empty vessel in many ways. Unfortunately, all the Latin and the Greek and the classics and all this, very impressive. Obviously, a clever guy,
yeah,
sure, but
yeah,
what does he truly believe? Who knows? It's hard to say. I mean, I think it was the Steerpike column in the Spectator, which last week brought up a load of pieces from his time as a journalist at the Telegraph, which were very, not kind of Milton Friedman libertarianism, but moving in that direction.
yeah.
These pieces were properly liberal pieces anyway. They were properly conservative pieces. Now look at him. He's like,
I know.
sort of Enver Hoxha or someone. This is a big fat blonde Enver Hoxha.
Yeah,
Nikolai
yeah,
Ceausescu. With
yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah.
it's extraordinary.
Fat Blair.
But Fat Blair, yeah. But his girlfriend though, his
Mm-hmm.
fiance, his wife. I don't know, did they get? I don't even know where we're at with that now. Is she seems like a nice girl, but
Yeah,
she also seems quite lefty and quite eco lefty and quite into that kind
yeah,
of save the world stuff. Fine, you want to save the world. That's good. She's very vocal about animal cruelty. Great.
yeah.
I can't stand people who are cruel to animals. I find the whole Chinese dog market thing, for example. I mean, I'd nearly say nuke them for that. No, I shouldn't say that, should I? I find it absolutely vile, that kind of behaviour, and I
It's
know she's
abhorrent.
she's she's quite outspoken about things like that. However, she also does seem to believe that governments can and should create utopian societies,
Mm-hmm.
environmentally friendly utopian societies, and she obviously has a great deal of influence over Boris. And we know that now because it leaked that she was able to change his mind about the Gender Recognition Act. So of course, the Tory party were throwing that out the window, which of course they bloody well should do.
Yeah,
But she changed his mind. Apparently, I don't know if you read that piece.
Gosh, no, I haven't.
Yeah, allegedly she changed his mind. I mean,
Wow.
people, you know, the thing about if you know what someone thinks about, say, for example, abortion, you can predict their views on, you know, a host of other political
Yeah.
topics. How many people do you know who are in favour of the Gender Recognition Act, who are classic liberals, conservatives, in favour of free speech, in favour of free markets, and so on?
Yeah. Zero.
Zero. You know,
That's scary, actually.
it is. I find it quite frightening because Boris,
Wow.
you know, Boris's personality is relatively well, and I say he's a bit of an empty vessel, but we do know things about him. Like from his time as London mayor, he was notoriously a pushover. You know, a friend of mine was telling me that his advisors wouldn't allow him to be in the same room as Bob Crow negotiating. Bob Crow, the union leader,
Really?
because Boris would fold. He would just give everything away. I think it's something to do with vanity, perhaps, and a sort of vain desire to be liked, to be loved, which is extremely dangerous in a leader.
Yeah.
It's extremely dangerous in a decision taker
Yeah.
in any organization.
I would agree with that.
So that seems to me a very, very worrying combination. Of course, then there's Dominic Cummings, who, you know, that piece about his time working in Russia, his former boss. Just for people listening, there's an article which I will put down in the description of this podcast, which you simply have to read. It's an account of Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's special advisor, an account of his time setting up a company in Russia. The man who he used to work for describes him as a sort of neo-Bolshevik who was obsessed with Leon Trotsky, Vladimir Lenin, and the Bolshevik Revolution. He was obsessed specifically with their ability to seize control of the nation, which was a remarkable achievement. I mean, I'm not personally someone who thinks that it was a good thing for the world, but it was a remarkable achievement because there was, I think, in the early stages of 2017, there were 24,000 members of the Bolshevik Party, but by the end of the year, there were 200,000. That sounds like, ooh, impressive.
Yeah.
That's a country of 96 million people. 96 million people in Russia at the time, and just that small band of sort of fervently revolutionary men were able to take over that country. And we know what came after. We know about the misery and the horror. Anyway, but Cummings is a great admirer of this stuff. That's the Prime Minister's chief advisor, the easily swayed Prime Minister's chief advisor.
Correct.
Sorry, I'll be quiet.
No, I mean, you make a good point. I think I agree with you. I think Boris is basically a pleaser.
Yeah.
He just likes to be liked, you know, and you can't have that in a leader. You can't. You've just got to be prepared not to be popular. I'm sorry, but you know, and I think that with Carrie Symonds, I think that there's definitely the element of her being a green sort of activist, and what you've just said now about the gender issue is quite shocking, actually, because there's no way I could place that on the right as an ideology, and it's pretty fundamental, to say the least. That's just totally woke. It's just absolute nonsense. I mean, it's in the whole critical thinking sort of theory, critical thought sort of agenda,
Yeah.
and it's just there's nothing right about that.
So it's critical theory, which is a movement within literature originally, which I think is within. I'm pretty sure it's within literature to begin with, and then it's moved into the social sciences, or vice versa. Anyway, critical theory does not mean that you look at the world critically in the sense that you apply reason and logic, and try to persuade people on that basis with facts and evidence. Critical theory is concerned with tearing down Western civilization by not just sort of challenging the assumptions on which it's built, but just by attacking them, attacking everything. And yeah, as you rightly point out, the Gender Recognition Act and this idea that you can identify as anything you so wish, and that your biological reality at the point of birth is irrelevant. Your biological reality, period, cannot, because of course that
exist.
cannot be altered, whether anyone likes it or not. Yeah, this social constructionism, I think is what it's called, isn't it? It's where you think that the world around you is socially constructed. It's complete babble,
Madness.
of course.
Yeah, madness.
Far left, straight from the mouths of Marxists, and this is Tory party policy.
Yeah. Shocking.
Anyway,
and again, the whole pursuit of the net zero and everything else too. So I can't see anything conservative about them anymore in any of their policies.
No. Can you tell us a little bit about business development? Slightly move away from British politics for a little bit. Give people a little bit of a break from our incessant whining about our situation. I'm sure they're all sat there saying these two here need to be quiet and appreciate what they've got. Yeah, so we'll move on. You're a business development manager, yeah. Can you? Because it's quite a expansive job title, really. Can you be more specific?
So what it comprises is basically, the end goal is to try and win new business, obviously. And I'm operating in the field of security. So secure identities, border management, that sort of space, and technology as well, secure technologies. So technologies for security, basically. And the company I work for is a private company. And it involves a lot of work with different governments as well, because obviously when you're working in that sort of space, it's down to governments obviously to implement different security measures. So that's what I do. It involves giving different presentations of our solutions, interacting with different providers, that sort of stuff, going around doing businessy stuff. And so I'm responsible for the EMEA region. So, but at the moment, I've been very busy with Africa. My background prior to this one is in biometrics. So I was working with a biometric company based here in the United Kingdom, a very good company. I think I should probably not name them, so that was my background. So I've got good knowledge on biometrics as well, technology in general in that sort of space for security, etc. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. So the work that I do in Africa is basically around that, and trying to win new business. And we already have existing projects as well, which I also look after. Or look at improving, etc., the services that we already deliver in those different spaces. So the border management space is where I get some of my insight as well into certain of the conversations that are taking place around different measures for this zero COVID or the COVID pass and all this sort of talk that's going around, trying to make countries and opening back up to international travel safe, and all these sorts of measures. So I'm seeing obviously what certain governments are putting in place on the ground, etc. And I'm actually preparing for a trip that I'm going on later on this week, which will be my first business trip, post-lockdown business trip. And that's already quite an eye-opener in terms of the extra measures, etc., and the extra logistics involved with trying to organize the trip now and making sure that I'm complying with every different government's different set of measures.
What are some of the measures? I mean, we already talked about the PCR test, didn't we?
Yeah. So basically, I have to have a safe to fly certificate, which involves having a PCR test, which I'm going to have done tomorrow, lucky me. And then when I reach the place I'm traveling to, which is in a country in West Africa, they have their own measures on the ground there, which involves having another test, a rapid test, apparently. And then I have to, so they'll be taking my passport on arrival, and I have to stay in a facility near the airport for 24 hours or so until I get my test back and they've registered me on a system, etc. And only then can I proceed to sort of, so I've got to quarantine, as it were, for sort of
in a facility. Did they specify what that means?
It's very vague at the moment.
Oh wow!
So I'm because obviously I'm working with people on the ground there. I'm counting on them to be able to facilitate as well for me and help with all that aspect. But what's interesting as well is that I've got to register on that government website and then upload the results of my test that I'm having done tomorrow. And when I arrive, I still need to be tested by them, and I need to pay upfront a fee as well, which is just shy of $100 to the country that I'm traveling to, and I'm paying over £200 tomorrow for the privilege of having the test done here before I go. So you can just see how it just gives you a bit of an idea of how much money is involved in the whole testing, around this COVID.
What's the country you're visiting? What is the situation with COVID like there? We don't have to say we don't have to say where it is. That doesn't matter. But have they got a serious COVID situation? In as far as anyone does have a serious COVID situation, that might warrant these kinds of measures, or is it just straightforwardly a racket as it appears?
Yeah, I would tend towards the latter. So from all the information that I've had and people I'm speaking with that are obviously living there and interacting and going about or trying to go about their business, etc., there's no real evidence of people dropping like flies or anything like that. Obviously, it's a very poor country. They would be severely impacted if the government were to implement a lockdown like we had here. It's just unthinkable. I mean, there's no question of putting people on furloughs, and people actually need to get out of their front door in the morning that's if they have a front door actually, to go and trade, sell whatever it is that they're selling, or to just it's hand to mouth there, so you just can't have those sorts of measures in place. There's no evidence, as I say, of any real cases of COVID, people dying of COVID, etc. And actually, the population objected very strongly, very early on, when there were talks of possible lockdowns, etc., such as we've seen in South Africa. They went into the street basically, and they were like,
No.
don't even go there to the government. Yeah, this ain't happening. So I think they had a 3-day lockdown, which is laughable. I'm not laughing at them, but I'm laughing. What it makes me laugh at is the whole idea that lockdown has any real impact on reducing rate of infection or reducing the death rates, but I think actually it was just a ticky box exercise, which again ties into the whole idea that the lockdowns were very much as well a copycat sort of, behavior, I think, by governments, and encouraged by the WHO and obviously there's a whole bunch of scientists out there that are proponents of the lockdown measures, including our own here, Prof. Ferguson, which we know is well that SAGE has a bunch of avowed Marxists sitting on there, communists there sitting in SAGE. So I think it tends to be a measure that the left wing have sort of favored. And it's when I think of the disastrous effects that it would have in many countries in Africa, and that it's already having in Africa, just from the knock-on effect of us having implemented in the West our lockdowns, etc. It just highlights even more how damaging and ridiculous and disproportionate a measure it is. So I think that it is a massive racket. The testing is definitely a huge money-making business. It's a business model, and it's been rolled out at the speed of light as well, which I find quite telling, because I studied. My father was in development work, and I did study development work as well. I just moved away from it because I just found that it had been hijacked again by, and that it wasn't actually the best way to actually for Africa to develop is through business, actually, through doing business with them, allowing them to do business, just free trade interaction, not having big government interventions and none of all that. And the whole NGO movement is very much pushing a whole bunch of these left-wing agendas that we see here, and Marxist agendas, same as the ones that we see BLM pushing as well, like the whole gender issues, etc. Which, when you look at certain of the countries that I visit, and you consider that where I'm going to, they have one dentist for the whole country, one registered dentist for the entire country. So
wow.
If people are going to try and say to me that gender equality or, being able to have people deciding on their gender is an issue that government, the government of that country, needs to be prioritizing over and above just access to basic sanitation, water, etc. I just think you've lost the plot. I'm sorry, but you're the bad guys.
Yeah. I mean, how could you look yourself in the face in the mirror if you were engaging in that sort of behavior, pushing mad campus ideologies on people who have to share a single dentist around the whole country? What shameful behavior,
Yeah.
But
exactly.
Can you explain a little bit about the way in which international welfare payments in the shape of aid do not work, or at least do not work better the situation on the ground in a country, as and let's call it Nigeria. Okay, you're not. I know that it isn't Nigeria that we're talking about. Let's call it Nigeria though for now. Okay, if £1 billion of aid arrives there, goes to the local government, and they spend it on eggs. I mean, obviously they wouldn't do this, but let's say they spend it on eggs. They spend it on boxes of cereal. They spend it on milk, but not within the country. Of course, they spend it on the international market, and they just send out pallets of eggs and cereal and milk. What does that do to the local community compared to, for example, doing business in Nigeria easy so that someone might, I don't know, say for example, go into the chicken farming business, or the growing wheat for cereal business, buys a herd of dairy cows, etc., etc., and provides it and sells it to other citizens. Because that's a little bit what it's like, that, isn't it? Really, is that fair description?
It is. So what you have is that you have increasingly they're a little bit, or they're trying to put in place certain measures so that there's a little bit more accountability and transparency with regards to when money's been handed over to a government for X or or Y, because there tended to be a lot of leakage, where you would hand over a pot of money, and the idea was that that pot of money was going to go, as you said, to buy a bunch of things to feed people that were in need of it. So that was one means of doing it. Oftentimes, you just ended up at the end of it where hardly any of it was actually ended up doing what it was meant to be doing or benefiting those that really needed it.
Is it primarily just going to the president for life and his entourage?
Or officials, who tend to sort of manage to feather their own sort of nests. Oftentimes, the nests or the second nests are in a Western country as well. Switzerland, obviously, we know the Swiss banks and all that. But what you have as well, which is just, it's almost like, and it's almost like a joke, but it's so, because it's just so blatant that when goods are sent, so when aid is in kind as opposed to a monetary transaction, and so we send out pallets of testing kit, for example, or PPE, or in the case of COVID right now, I mean, that stuff is like for sale in the market. You'll see it in the local market. You'll see people setting up a business selling it, and it's literally still got like the labels of the various aid organizations on it, like it will have USAID or whatever, and you'll have like milk.
So how does that happen? Is it leaks from warehouses?
Literally, yeah, exactly, yeah, from all sorts of. There's at different points of the journey. Basically, there'll be like leakage, and the aid companies know this. I mean, the aid organizations know this.
Yeah.
How can you not know it if you're working for an NGO and you're on the ground and you can see it? You can see that, a bunch of the stuff that was shipped out for, a famine or whatever is ending up on the marketplace. And actually, what happens is, to answer your first question, it actually acts. It's very bad. It's poisonous, because what it does is that it incentivizes actually the corruption. And what it also does is it gives governments those that don't have the interest of, the people or their interest at heart to actually use these for political gains. So just to give you an example, if you've got a group of people in the western side of the country that are starving, and so aid countries are sending stuff in for them, but those people also tend to be anti-government or protesting against the government that's in power. There's absolutely no incentive for the government to ensure that those goods actually reach those people. In fact, what happens is it just becomes the goods that they receive are actually a means of funds for them, funding their own political campaigns and, you know, their own agendas. It's sure there's a fraction. It's not always the case, but what I have experienced and what I witnessed as a child growing up is that the work that has an impact is when it's literally hands-on. So, you know, when you've got people that have dedicated their life to being, I don't know, missionaries, but what they do is they run a mission hospital, you know, so they've got a hospital where they literally are, you know, providing service, you know, care, health and stuff, even if it's really basic to people. That I can't knock. I've seen it with my own eyes where, you know, that they're doing amazing work, all these people. But this whole idea of NGOs being, you know, a source of good and change and positive change in Africa and helping is, I think, for the birds. The majority, I would say, sure, there's a handful that are doing good work because it's more hands-on, etc. Or they make sure certain governments, I think the Nordic countries actually are much better at controlling, as it were, you know, making sure that whatever it is they give actually ends up, the majority ends up, because they'll follow through. So they have like people that are actually making sure that certain projects are implemented and that are, you know, making sure that but we have situations where we just send the whole bunch, you know, an aircraft full of PPE or, you know, testing kits, and it just reaches there, and then you've just got, you know, the majority of it just ends up enriching a government official who's just going to become a distributor of it. Basically, he becomes a supplier of PPE, you know.
and what
himself.
What would that do to the Nigerian PPE entrepreneur? You know, it makes his business unviable,
Correct.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, just as the eggs do, or the breakfast cereals, if they arrive on pallets from the sky, then you know, why go into that game?
Exactly. It distorts obviously the market, supply and demand and stuff, you know. It disincentivizes people as well. It has an effect on an entrepreneurship as well. We're working actually, because I said that we in the company that I work for also works on technologies for precisely that. It's trying to find solutions to make sure that the identity of recipients of aid, so government aid benefits, are actually who they claim to be and the right people that are actually supposed to be receiving that benefit. Because what would happen is the money would end up in the wrong hands, in the hands of officials, etc., instead of, let's say, in the hands of the farmers. That the World Bank had given a bunch of money for farmers to have, you know, after a famine or whatever, or bad year, bad season, to be able to buy some seeds, you know, or have some saplings, etc., to start all over again. And all these funds were just never reaching the farmers. So it's just a self-perpetuating sort of situation. So we're actually working on technologies which enable the identification of farmers, etc. And then you have you can implement therefore a system where there's traceability, you know, and you have a system where you have now, rather than exchanging money, you do it's in kind. So you actually hand out saplings as opposed to, or you have registered and vetted suppliers of those goods where the farmer can go and get his seeds from or his saplings from, and then he's identified as a bona fide, farmer on a system.
And
And
is having those systems in place a precondition of receiving aid now from
yes,
Britain?
more so. Certain organizations are trying to make it a precondition, or what they do is they set certain criteria at the beginning, as sort of conditions of receiving the aid that the government in question will have to then provide,
Who opposes
evidence of. Sorry?
Does anyone oppose it? I bet it like Keir Starmer or someone like that.
Well, it's yeah, probably there are people. There are always people, vested interests everywhere. Which is the thing is that I think that we spoke about this before, which is that because I grew up in these countries, seeing these things happening. I was in Ethiopia during the Derg regime, which was communist. Basically, you still had curfew. You had a lot of the stuff that was seen coming out of Victoria in Australia at the moment around this whole enforcing of mask wearing.
You saw this sort of thing on the Derg in when did he go?
So in the 80s.
Yeah.
I was still very young at the time, but they had rations. We still had rations for sugar, flour, and certain goods, and people used to queue up once a week to get rations. You had to be on a government list for accommodation, and obviously, if you were a government official and the higher up the rank you were, these things didn't apply to you. You had free supply and unlimited supply of sugar, flour, and any accommodation you desire to.
Some animals are more equal than others.
Absolutely. So, and during the famine that they had there, and they had the Live Aid, and they had all this, and all this was going on in the West, obviously. And again, the majority of the stuff that was arriving in Addis in Ethiopia wasn't ending up in the, going to the right places, because the problems on the ground as well are much more complex sometimes than we realize here. There's more than meets the eye, and yeah, there's a famine, but why is it that those people are still living in those areas? Why is it? There's a whole bunch of questions that we don't bother, or our media, etc., don't bother investigating, and our woke celebs, engage in, thinking that they're do-gooders, but actually they're just doing a bunch of harm. They're just adding fuel to the fire, really. But they can't see it. They can't see it because they've just bought into the whole concept of, let's just have a gig, have some fun, get together, beat some drums, strum some, do some strumming together, and raise some money, and then we can save the world.
I tend to think that sort of peacocking of your moral rectitude is all about them and nothing to do with Africans, for example. It's all about purging the liberal guilt which consumes them. It's about driving it out with these kinds of grand programs, which they must surely know will never succeed. We're going to cure poverty in Africa before the year 2000 or whatever it might be. They can't possibly believe that that's going to happen with these concerts. So yeah, I tend to think it's more about them. But can we just put a little bit of pressure on some of the questions which aren't asked, which you just referred to there before, which aren't asked by our woke media and academics who just they have no interest. I agree with you; they don't. Can we put a little bit of pressure on that? What kind of questions should the journalists in Britain be asking, for example, of aid spending and what to expect from it, and why maybe the results of billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds aren't really all that obvious. Certainly, I mean, maybe I mean, maybe there are great improvements there as a result of the aid. I don't know. Maybe you know more than me.
Well, I think that it's the whole concept is flawed in itself. Of I'm all for aid when there's a humanitarian, when there's a catastrophe somewhere and a crisis. Of course, we should help. But the type of aid that I find questionable is where it's ongoing long-term projects and where there's an agenda that actually ties in with Western political agendas. And actually what we see is that, or what I've seen, is that why are you trying to push the whole gender identity thing in Africa right now? That's one question. So when I was studying development studies, I remember just being totally frustrated, completely. I actually remember asking them one day and saying, who's writing all this stuff, because this is actually nonsense. If you really believe, number one, that you can categorize the whole of Africa as like across Africa, women need to be empowered. That's just stupid in itself. Have you seen the size of Africa? I mean, place the map of Great Britain on a map of Africa, and that will give you some context as to how ridiculous such a blanket statement is.
Yeah.
I grew up in countries where the women in Africa had all the power. And so when I was being taught that women in Africa needed to be empowered, I just thought, you're having a laugh. You need to come with me and I'll show you certain cultures and stuff in Africa where the women are empowered, but just not maybe in the way that you think that they ought to be empowered, or saying the stuff that you want them to be saying, or living in a way that you actually want to impose on them, which again annoys me when I hear the whole Black Lives Matter nonsense. Because I'm thinking, number one, when I look at all the people advocating for Black Lives Matter, and I look at them and I think, how many of you and how often, how many of you have actually been to Africa or the Caribbean, etc.? How many of you go there regularly? And what actual knowledge do you have of Africa and what Africans really want? But obviously, when I say Africa is completely, they don't care about that. I mean, when the whole Black Lives Matter just seems to be Black people living in the West. Yeah. Because they don't seem to be addressing any of the issues that are currently happening in Africa, including with regards to, for instance, they go on about slavery. And I'm thinking, well, guess what? It still goes on in Africa. Why aren't you addressing that? So questions like that they should be asking as well. And it's there seems to be a lot of lobbying, etc. as well. It's always a question of follow the money with the aid money as well that comes, and there's always strings attached. It's always, we'll give you this much, but you'll have to purchase stuff from us as well. So
yeah,
it's kind of it's almost like, as long as you use a certain percentage to buy stuff from us or to purchase your services to run this project from us, or you use our people, then we don't care what happens with the rest of the percentage.
I mean, that is just rampantly corrupt, isn't it? It's rampantly corrupt.
Yeah. And it's just, even with regards to, we used to joke when we were in Africa. And by the way, one thing that I do like a lot when I go back there is just that how natural people are and how you can still speak freely and have conversations and stuff with people without, like how we are, we have to be so careful about what we say and how we say it and all this, because we might be labeled as racist. Or I don't have an issue, like when I'm interacting with my counterparts there and that are from the country, Black Africans from that part of the world, etc. I like it that we can have a laugh about, stereotypes of, because I'm coming from England, so I might need this at dinner, or I'll need my cooked breakfast. They think that's funny or whatever. It's stereotyping, and I'll say to them, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you get your yam for breakfast."
Yeah,
that's not going to vex them. They're not going to, they're not going to think, "How dare you,"
That comment there about the yam, which to me is just totally benign. It doesn't, it's just a joke. It's harmless fun. It's
Yeah.
Stereotypes are oftentimes funny.
Yeah.
People wouldn't laugh at them otherwise, would they? But if
Exactly.
if you were say working in the public sector in Britain, and you in the staff room at lunchtime made a joke like that, that would be the end of your career.
Yeah, pretty
You
much.
would be lucky not to end up with the police at your door. That's how bad it is now. If I made a joke like that on Twitter, I would expect the woke constabulary to be knocking on my door within half an hour. Come with me, sir.
Yeah.
What have I done wrong?
Peter Pisspot.
Peter.
That's Lawrence, Andrew Lawrence.
Andrew Lawrence,
which is brilliant.
Inspector Private Detective Peter Pisspot. Yeah, I would expect him to be at the door, ready to take me away. So come with me. And I'd be like, why? What have I done? So you don't need to know that. I see that coming. I see that sort of Kafkaesque scenario coming down the path towards us. But it's interesting bringing back to Africa, that what you seem to be saying is that in very fundamental ways, perhaps the most fundamental way of all, which is speech, parts of Africa are far freer than here.
Oh yeah, totally. I can have a laugh about all sorts of things. They can have a laugh. Nobody's on tenterhooks, or walking on eggshells. There's none of that. Actually, one thing.
Go on.
One thing which is actually quite funny in a way, but it's also quite shocking, is that I was having a conversation with somebody we were out having some dinner, and we were hearing other people speaking, and so anyway, we had invited them over, and I started exchanging with them, and they were they were saying stuff that would just shock people here.
What? Go on, give us a
stereotypes taste. About Western stereotypes, like they have the very socially conservative, generally speaking, I would say, Africans.
Yeah.
Compared to us, much more conservative socially, and so in certain circles, not so much with our peers and stuff, but in certain circles and certain countries, they still have a problem with homosexuality, for example. So they would literally say to me, well, you have a problem with corruption, but that's cultural. They'll say to me that corruption is part of that culture, that we call it corruption, but it's not culture. It's not corruption. It's a cultural thing. And in certain respects, it's difficult for me to argue against that claim, because I think that there's certain elements where I agree, it's corruption, it's really bad, but there's certain elements where I also think that I see it as a form of, it is kind of cultural, where they just, if you've got money and you're in a job and you're a government official or whatever, it's, you just give people something when you go, each time you go through the barriers. You're allowed to go through the barriers. You're not sort of bribing them to get through the barriers because you're entitled to go through those barriers, but you would be considered mean, as in tight, and not caring if you didn't give them something when you went through. So that I can see there's, but for an onlooker, that looks like corruption.
It's not that unlike, you know, giving the bellboy money in the hotel, is it?
Exactly.
It's not compulsory to do that. I mean, I know that's an American thing. We don't have bellboys here, but a better example to keep
tipping.
Tipping. It's not compulsory to tip, but it's not well thought of if you don't. I was thinking of the famous scene in Reservoir Dogs with Steve Buscemi lecturing them all and not tipping. But is that roughly analogous? Because that's a cultural thing for us.
Yes,
isn't it?
Yes, but where it would be shocking for an onlooker that's not aware, you might see somebody doing that in a situation where it's just totally unacceptable to us. It could be misconstrued as, because I'm talking about an airport, for example, or, you know, where you're giving somebody a customs guard something.
Yeah, I mean,
and people, do you see what I mean? That's like, wow, are you kidding me?
So slipping the customs officer a fiver or something to.
Yeah.
And what would that get me? You know, what would I get for my money in an African airport if I were to slip the customs official $10 or $20 or whatever?
So immediately
I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah. Immediately you'd be like a good guy. I mean, you'd be like, number one, you get the customs, you know, you understand that this is just like, it's a cultural thing, you know, it's appreciation. They call it appreciation, you know, where obviously in my case, I'm like, I'm taken care of in the sense that I can't be, you know, engaging in any of this sort of stuff. And obviously that will be explained to them. So I'll have a VIP reception or whatever, which, you know, the protocols teams or whatever will make sure that none of that is apparent or that I'm involved or have to engage in any of that. But I know obviously from previous, obviously from growing up as a child there, or seeing it when outside of my own professional context, you know, that it's, and I know it's Africa, you know, so I remember being stopped at a red light, you know, I was riding a scooter out there in one of these countries, and I was stopped at a red light, and it's just like, there was no red, it's just one red light in that whole city, by the way, you know, one set of traffic lights in the whole capital. And it was just a nightmare because it was at a crossroads that most people you had to go through, you know, to reach whichever section of you were living in, whichever the living quarters were, you had to go through there to get to the business district every day, you know, and where everything happened. So it was like a strategic place, and invariably you would get stopped for allegedly burning the red light, and it's like, it wasn't red, you know, it was so green, you know, but you just, you know, all they want is, so I don't condone it, but I understand where it stems from as well, which is the fact that these people also, do you need to, I'm conscious of the fact that we've been speaking for quite a while, so
it's okay, it's all good.
Okay.
Have you got to go?
No, I'm fine. But just say, because I'm aware that we've been talking for a while. So
what what I think is best. We're coming up on 2 hours now.
Yeah.
We'll do a little while longer, and then maybe
Right.
we will do a part two at another day,
Okay.
if you would like, of course.
Yeah.
Fantastic, because
Sounds good.
I am conscious that I think about 2 hours is good for a podcast.
For the poor listeners as well.
Well, sure. I mean, if anyone's still with us, you know, I
Indeed.
I salute you. I doff my hat. You are a titan.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of that, but yeah, no, I'm really enjoying the conversation. If
So what I'm trying to,
if you
yeah,
don't grease the palm of the official,
yeah.
what might become of you?
I would say that it varies. So from nothing to, it depends what kind of a day they're having or if they haven't paid. Because that's what people don't realize as well, is that a lot of these public servants sometimes go without being paid for months on end
Wow.
because there's just no money. There's literally no money in the coffers.
Until someone prints it.
So, yeah, either until someone prints it, just another sort of. So that's why it's difficult when you're living there and you understand the realities to think ill of the person. It becomes so everybody knows it, so they know that okay, it's Saturday, probably we're going to be stopped by the coppers, because it's the end of the week, you know and it's almost, and in that sense it's almost becomes cultural. So I understand when they say that. I can see that, but obviously when you're looking at like billions of aid money coming in and that going amiss, or goods that have come in to go to people that are starving, or in a crisis like Ebola or whatever, and it's not reaching them, then that's not cultural. That's like, as far as I'm concerned, it's not good at all.
Yeah.
But so this official basically said to me, hang on a minute, because you say that we have corruption, but you have homosexuality in the West.
Which
And I'm like, wow, okay. Obviously, I can't say wow,
yeah.
but
It's so easy and so foolish to project your values onto totally other different people, be they around the world or you people from other eras. Project. I mean, this is the thing. Black Lives Matter again, and slavery, condemning people who were connected in some way to the slave trade via some dead family member. Is it's mad. I mean,
yeah,
everyone, virtually everybody was involved in the slave trade. I mean, at a certain level of society at the time, because
absolutely.
it was just the done thing. Now, it
Yeah,
doesn't make it right.
no,
However, the circumstances, the cultural mores, and so forth do matter. And
yeah,
likewise here, I, I mean, I have I'm quite a liberal guy when it comes to homosexuality. I'm not, I'm kind of indifferent to it, really, to be perfectly honest. I know lots of
yeah,
gay people and they're wonderful people. I'm a straight man myself. It's not for me. You live your life
yeah,
however you like.
absolutely.
I'm kind of a live and let live kind of guy. But at the same time, I don't feel that it is right for me to condemn